She hugged a stranger to avoid her ex. She didn't know he was a billionaire who'd turn her world upside down. It was supposed to be just a quick in and out. Madison Blake had no desire to linger at the lavish wedding reception, not with the polished marble floors glistening under chandeliers and strangers in $1,000 suits brushing past her like she didn't exist. She was here for one reason only: to drop off a gift for her college friend and leave before anyone noticed her thrift store cocktail dress and shoes that pinched her toes. But then she saw him, or rather them, her ex Ryan, arm in arm with his perfectly put-together new fiancé. He was wearing that smug half-smile that used to charm her and now made her stomach knot. The fiancé was all elegance, soft waves in her hair, an expensive clutch in her hand, looking every bit the woman Madison thought she should have been. Her throat tightened. Her fingers gripped her clutch like a lifeline. She could already feel Ryan's eyes sizing her up silently, comparing her to the woman beside him. The humiliation rose fast, hot, sharp, unshakable. And that's when it happened. Her gaze darted to the center of the lobby where a tall man stood alone, scrolling on his phone. He was dressed in a dark suit that fit too well to be off the rack, but something about the way he lingered there, slightly apart from the crowd, made him seem out of place, like he didn't belong here either. Before her brain could catch up, her body moved. She strode across the floor, dropped her purse, and wrapped her arms tightly around him, as if she'd known him forever. The man froze. She could feel his confusion in the way his shoulders stiffened. Then slowly his arms came around her firm and steady. His voice was low, close to her ear. "Should I be worried?" "Please," she whispered urgently. "Just go with it." Ryan passed behind her, and Madison caught a glimpse of his puzzled expression. Her heart pounded in her ears. The stranger didn't let go. If anything, his hold became just a fraction tighter. "You okay?" he murmured. "I will be." She managed pulling back slightly to look up at him. That's when she noticed sharp jawline, dark hair that fell in easy waves, warm hazel eyes studying her with quiet curiosity. "I'm sorry," she blurted. "That was weird." He smiled faintly, as if the whole thing amused him more than it startled him. "I've never been hugged by a stranger before." Madison laughed, nervously too loudly. But in that moment, something shifted. The sting of her ex's smugness faded, replaced by an unexpected spark she couldn't name. "I'm Madison," she said, brushing hair from her face. "Ethan," he replied. "Nice to be your temporary boyfriend." She rolled her eyes, smiling despite herself. "Let me buy you a drink to say thank you." And just like that, the night she thought she'd spend hiding in the shadows had taken a turn she never saw coming. The bar was tucked into a quiet corner of the hotel, away from the noise and glitter of the ballroom. Madison slid onto a stool, still feeling the echo of what she'd just done. Ethan followed, his presence calm, but undeniably magnetic. The bartender gave them a curious glance as Madison ordered a glass of red wine. Ethan asked for a whiskey neat. They sat in the low amber light, and for the first time that night, Madison exhaled. She could still feel Ryan's eyes in her mind, that silent judgment. But here with this stranger, the weight of it eased. So Ethan began swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Do you make a habit of hugging strangers at weddings?" She smirked. "Only when I'm in a bind." What kind of bind was that? She hesitated. Honesty felt risky, but something in his gaze was steady, unpressing. My ex was right there, with his fiancée. I panicked. Ethan chuckled quietly. "Well, I'm honored to have been your human shield. You were surprisingly good at it," she teased. "I've been told I'm adaptable," he said, taking a sip. Then, after a pause, "What about him? Serious relationship?" "Too serious. Too long. Too wrong." She replied, the words tasting bittersweet. Ethan nodded, accepting her answer without probing. That she noticed was rare. Most people pushed. Most wanted the messy details. He just let it be. The conversation drifted. They talked about the absurdity of weddings, about overpriced floral arrangements, and tiny glasses of champagne that never seemed to be refilled. Madison found herself laughing, really laughing, and the sound felt foreign in her own ears. "You don't seem like you wanted to be here," she said finally. "I didn't," Ethan admitted. "A business partner's family. Said no 3 times before I gave in." "You could have fooled me. You blend in well enough." "That's the point," he said with a faint smile. "You blend in, people stop asking questions." She tilted her head. And yet, here you are, letting a total stranger blow your cover. He gave a small shrug, as if it didn't bother him. Maybe I needed the interruption. A warmth spread through her chest. Not the wine, not entirely. There was something about the way he said it, like maybe she'd given him a little more than just a story to tell later. The night could have ended there. She could have thanked him again, slipped away, and left him to his world. But something about the way his eyes lingered made her stay. The noise from the ballroom grew louder as another wave of guests poured into the bar area. Madison caught herself watching him, studying the subtle way he carried himself, like someone who'd spent years learning to blend into rooms he didn't want to be in. She wondered what he was doing in her story, and why she felt so certain this wasn't the last time she'd see him. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Madison's blinds, cutting across her kitchen table, where an untouched cup of coffee was cooling beside her phone. She was scrolling through emails when a text popped up from an unknown number. "You left your courage on the floor last night. Thought I should return it." She stared at the screen, her pulse ticking faster. There was only one person it could be. She typed back before she could overthink it. "Where should I meet you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Blue Harbor Bookshop. I'll be in the poetry aisle." An hour later, Madison pushed open the shop's glass door. The scent of paper and old ink wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. And there he was, Ethan, sitting cross-legged on the floor between tall shelves, flipping through a worn copy of Robert Frost. "You're really here," he said, closing the book with a quiet thump. "So are you," she replied. "I half expected you to helicopter in and float down on a stack of $100 bills." His laugh was low and genuine, not really my style. They wandered the aisles together, fingertips brushing along the spines of novels. Madison told him about her lifelong dream of writing a book, how it had been swallowed by bills, 2 jobs, and the noise of everyday life. Ethan admitted he sometimes wished he could be invisible for a day free from the weight of expectations. For nearly 2 hours they forgot the rest of the world. They moved from fiction to travel to history, sharing the stories that had shaped them. Madison felt an ease she hadn't known in years, a comfort in speaking without rehearsing her words. At one point, Ethan picked up a tattered collection of Pablo Neruda poems and handed it to her. "Read this one," he said. She glanced at the page. "I love you without knowing how or when or from where." The air between them shifted, warmer, heavier. She quickly closed the book, placing it back on the shelf. When they finally stepped outside the city's early afternoon hum surrounded them, Ethan turned to her. "I don't usually do this," he said. "Pick up girls who attack you at weddings," she teased. "No," he smiled. "Ask them to spend more time with me." She held his gaze for a moment before answering softly, "Okay." They walked toward a cafe, speaking in the comfortable rhythm of people who were just beginning to realize they wanted to know everything about each other. For Madison, the day felt like the first chapter of something she hadn't dared to start in a long time. The cafe's windows rattled gently in the afternoon breeze as Madison and Ethan settled into a corner booth. The sunlight caught in the steam curling off their mugs, and for a while, it felt like the rest of the world had faded into a soft blur. But halfway through a story about a road trip gone wrong, Ethan's phone lit up. The screen faced him, but Madison caught a quick flash of a name she didn't recognize. Short formal, followed by a string of numbers. His expression shifted just for a second before he flipped the phone face down and forced a smile. "You can answer it if you need to," she offered. "It's fine," he said, brushing it off. The moment passed, but not for Madison. Something about that flicker in his eyes lingered in her thoughts as they parted ways that afternoon. That evening, curiosity got the better of her. She sat cross-legged on her bed laptop, glowing in the dim light, and typed his full name into the search bar, Ethan Cole. The results loaded in seconds. Her breath caught. There he was, in crisp black and white portraits for Forbes and Fortune, standing in front of glass skyscrapers, shaking hands with politicians, speaking at tech conferences. CEO of Cole Industries. Net worth $1.8 billion. Articles described him as a visionary, a disruptor, a man whose decisions could move markets. Madison closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard. Her mind replayed every moment, his easy laughter, the way he sat cross-legged on the bookstore floor, the quiet patience in his voice. None of it matched the image on those pages. She chewed her lip. Was she really just getting to know him? Or was she already stepping into a world where she'd never feel equal? The next day, her phone buzzed with a new message. A photo of the bookstore floor where they'd sat yesterday, and a note picked up a few from your list. If you won't write your own stories yet, I'll read the ones you love. Her chest tightened. It wasn't a grand gesture, not the kind you'd expect from a man worth nearly $2 billion. It was personal, thoughtful, almost painfully sincere, and that somehow scared her more than the headlines ever could. Late the next afternoon, Madison opened her apartment door to find Ethan standing there, holding a simple brown paper bag. "I come bearing gifts," he said, with a half smile. Inside were 3 books from the list she'd given him, each with a slim bookmark tucked halfway through. "I started all of them," he said, "but I want to finish them with you." For a moment, Madison couldn't find her voice. No one had ever done something like this for her. Not her friends, not her family, certainly not Ryan. It wasn't about the books themselves. It was about the way he'd listened, really listened. They ended up on the rooftop of her building, the city skyline stretching out in shades of gold and slate as the sun began to dip. Madison sat cross-legged in her favorite worn hoodie and sweatpants, her hair in a messy bun. Ethan had shrugged off his blazer and rolled up his sleeves, leaning against the railing with that calm, unreadable expression. "How does someone like you end up alone?" she asked quietly. His gaze shifted toward the horizon. "Because I've been followed my whole life, but rarely chosen." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than the cooling wind. Madison wrapped her arms around her knees, unsure what to say. She thought about all the moments people had walked away from her, when she couldn't give them what they wanted, when she wasn't enough. They stayed there until the city lights began to twinkle on. Conversation meandered from childhood embarrassments to the most recent books they had loved. Madison found herself laughing again, but now there was an ache behind it, a sense that something fragile had been revealed. As they parted that night, Ethan rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. "Don't forget, he said I'm still holding you to finishing those books." She smiled, but inside she was already wrestling with a truth she didn't want to name. The more she learned about him, the more she wanted to keep him in her world, and the more she feared she couldn't. A week later, Madison and Ethan were walking out of a dimly lit poetry reading downtown. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Madison's cheeks still hurt from smiling. He'd spent the entire evening whispering quick, witty comments about the more dramatic performances, making her laugh when she knew she should be quiet. They'd just reached the sidewalk when a sleek black SUV pulled up beside them. The tinted windows slid down, revealing a man in a dark suit. "Mr. Cole," the man said, briskly. "Emergency board call in 20. Madison froze. Mr. Cole. Hearing it out loud sounded foreign and formal. Ethan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. For just a second, his face became unreadable. Then he turned to her, his voice softer. "I'll call you right after." She nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The SUV door shut with a heavy thud, the windows tinting dark again. She stood there watching the vehicle merge into traffic until it was gone. The city noises seemed louder now, more distant. That night, her phone stayed silent. The next day, too. By the third day, she stopped checking every few minutes, telling herself this was why she didn't fall for men like him. Men who belonged to boardrooms and private jets and circles she would never be invited into. On the evening of the 4th day, her phone finally buzzed. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I should have explained everything earlier. Can we talk?" Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, deleted typed again. "Madison, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not like the women in your world." The reply came almost instantly. "Ethan, that's exactly why I'm still here." She stared at the screen for a long moment, her heart caught between fear and something dangerously close to hope. That night, she opened her laptop. She found the folder that held the half-finished novel she'd abandoned 4 years earlier. She read the first line out loud and didn't cry. Not because of Ethan, but because somewhere inside something was starting to heal, and she wasn't sure if that terrified her or set her free. The next time Madison saw Ethan, they were seated at a small corner table in a quiet garden cafe he'd suggested, a place she never knew existed. The air was cool and fragrant with lavender, the stone paths winding between ivy-covered walls like something from a storybook. They sipped coffee under the shade of an old oak, talking about books, music, and the sort of random questions you only ask when you feel safe. But beneath the surface, Madison felt a faint tremor. She still remembered the SUV, the formal Mr. Cole, the 3 long days of silence. Midway through their conversation, Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Come to a fundraiser with me this Friday," he said. She blinked. "A fundraiser. Art, wine, music. I want you there with me." Her stomach tightened. "Ethan, that's your world." "No," he said quietly. "It's the world I'm trying to step away from. But I have to show up, and I want you beside me." She looked down at her coffee. "I don't even have a dress for that kind of place." "Then we'll get one." He said, his voice so calm it left no room for argument. That afternoon, they walked into a boutique Madison would have normally crossed the street to avoid. Every dress looked like it belonged to someone else's life. She kept her hands at her sides, afraid to touch anything. 3 dresses later, she stepped out of the fitting room in a deep green gown with long sleeves. The fabric was soft, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone else. Ethan didn't speak. He just looked at her eyes, warm and steady, like she was the art in the room. "I don't belong in your world," she whispered. He stepped closer. "Then let's build a new one." Friday came too quickly. Madison nearly backed out 3 separate times. But when the elevator doors opened at the event, there was Ethan. No suit, just a dark shirt and open collar hands in his pockets, wearing that same look that told her she didn't need to pretend. People noticed them, yes, but he never flinched. When one elegantly dressed woman asked with a polite smile, "So, how did you 2 meet?" Madison told the truth. "I panicked and hugged him at a wedding." For a beat there was silence. Then Ethan laughed, warm and unapologetic. "Best surprise of my life." The air on the balcony was cooler than inside, carrying the faint scent of roses from the landscape terrace below. Madison leaned against the railing, letting the city lights blur while she caught her breath. Inside, the clink of wine glasses and the low hum of conversation rolled on, but out here it was quiet, at least for a moment. That's when she heard them. 2 men standing near the far edge, their voices low, but not low enough. "Cute but temporary," one said with a short laugh. "Yeah," the other replied. "These kinds of girls never last long. Cole always goes back to his own kind." The words landed like ice water down her spine. She kept her back to them, but her cheeks burned hot. She could have stormed over. She could have corrected them. Instead, she just froze. Because the worst part wasn't that they might be wrong. It was that they could be right. She slipped back inside, weaving through clusters of guests without meeting anyone's eyes. Ethan was across the room, speaking to a small group. He caught sight of her, his expression softening, but before he could make his way over, she was already at the coat check. The driverless street outside was a relief. She walked fast, heels clicking against the sidewalk, until she reached the main road and hailed a cab. She didn't text him, didn't leave a note. The next morning, she was at Blue Harbor Bookshop, sitting cross-legged on the floor in the poetry section. The store was quiet, just the faint hum of the old ceiling fan above her. Ethan found her there. He didn't rush in, didn't start with questions, just lowered himself to the floor beside her. "I heard what they said," he began. Madison didn't look up from the book in her hands. Were they wrong? He was quiet for a beat. They were cruel and wrong. "You didn't defend me," she said, her voice soft but edged. "I didn't want to embarrass you by making a scene," he replied. She turned to him, eyes sharp now. "So you let them think they were right?" "No," he said, steady. "I just knew it's not what I say that changes things. It's what I do." From his coat, he pulled a folded document. A lease agreement. "The space next to this bookstore," he said, setting it in front of her. "I bought it for you. No strings, no deals, just yours. I want you to have something that's yours, even if I'm not part of it." Her eyes stung, but she didn't reach for the paper. Not yet. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "You are." Madison didn't take the lease that day. She left it folded on her kitchen table untouched, as if it might burn her fingers if she picked it up. Every morning, for the next 2 weeks, she passed by it on her way to make coffee, her eyes catching on the landlord's name, the address, the possibilities. She had dreamed of opening a little book cafe since she was 19. But now that it was within reach, handed to her with no strings, she couldn't say yes. Not like this. Because it wasn't just a storefront. It was her dream, and she couldn't shake the fear that accepting it would mean she owed that dream to someone else's wallet, not her own will. Ethan didn't call after the first few days. He had promised he wouldn't chase her, but that didn't mean he wasn't thinking about her. In his office, surrounded by people speaking in profit margins and quarterly goals, he found himself distracted searching online for her favorite authors just to feel closer to her. One afternoon, a plain envelope slid through Madison's mail slot. No name, no return address, just a single piece of paper inside. The words were typed simple. You were never small. You were simply holding yourself in so tightly no one could see how big your heart was. She knew it was from him. He'd said something like it once before, but never written it down. She folded the paper and tucked it into her notebook, as if it belonged there among her own unfinished sentences. That night, her best friend Olivia came over with 2 bottles of wine and zero judgment. They sat barefoot on the floor, surrounded by takeout containers, the city noise muffled by the closed windows. "Do you love him?" Olivia asked. Madison hesitated. "I think I do." "Then why are you scared?" Madison stared at the loose thread in the carpet. "Because he saw all of me too quickly, before I could filter anything." Olivia leaned back, sipping her wine. "Maybe that's the point." Madison's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if I let myself love him and lose me?" Olivia's eyes softened. "What if you love him and find more of you than you ever thought possible?" The question stayed with her long after Olivia left. The lease was still on the table, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a choice she hadn't yet made. The next morning, Madison stood in front of the empty storefront next to Blue Harbor Bookshop. The glass reflected the pale winter sunlight, and for a moment she saw herself not as she was, but as she could be. Hands dusted with coffee grounds, shelves lined with stories she'd chosen, laughter spilling from a corner table. She didn't have the key. She didn't even step inside. Instead, she pressed her palm against the cool glass and whispered, "If this is meant to be mine, I'll come back for it." Then she turned and walked away. Later that evening, she sat on her couch with her phone in hand. She recorded a voice message, her heart thudding in her ears. "You scare me, Ethan, because I've never been loved without conditions. I don't want your money. I don't want a fairy tale. I want the man who held me like I was more than my panic. The man who reads poetry and remembers what I love. And if he's still out there, tell him I'm not running anymore." She hit send before she could second guess it. Then she cried, messy, unguarded tears, and smiled through them. 2 days later, she walked into the landlord's office with every cent she had, saved a small personal loan, and a conviction she hadn't felt in years. By the time she left, the lease was hers, signed in her name, bought with her own grit. When she finally found Ethan, he was on the same rooftop where they had once shared coffee and paperbacks. The wind caught her hair as she crossed the space between them, tote bag over her shoulder. Without a word, she set a small ceramic figurine of a bookstore between them, the one he'd sent her after her voice message. "I got your bookstore," she said softly. His eyes searched hers. "And I got your message." She pulled the signed lease from her bag and placed it in his hands. "I needed it to be mine, before I could be yours." His throat tightened. "So does this mean?" "It means she said you don't have to save me. You never did." He smiled, a slow exhale of relief in his eyes. "I didn't want to save you. I just wanted to see you." For the first time, she believed him. 6 months later, the sign above the door read, "The First Page." The bookstore cafe had a warm amber glow that spilled onto the sidewalk each evening, drawing in regulars and curious passersby alike. Inside, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint musk of new paper and old hardcovers. Madison moved easily between tables, greeting familiar faces, refilling mugs, and straightening stacks of books on the low front shelves. A small cafe space in the back buzzed with quiet conversation, and a bulletin board near the counter displayed handwritten notes from customers, snippets of poems, gratitude for favorite recommendations, doodles from children who had wandered in with their parents. Ethan was there most weekends, shelving books, carrying boxes from the delivery van, or sitting in the corner with a coffee reading one of Madison's favorites. Sometimes he'd slip a duplicate copy into the window display, one for the shop, one for whoever needed it next. Their love didn't become a headline. There were no glossy magazine spreads, no gala photographs, no public declarations. It didn't need any of that. What they had was private, real, and deeply earned. There were moments, small ones, that told the truer story. The way Madison would glance up from behind the counter and find Ethan already looking at her with that quiet, steady gaze. The way he never tried to overshadow her successes, only celebrated them. The way she reached for his hand not out of panic or fear, but because she wanted to. One slow Sunday afternoon, Madison locked the front door early. They sat together at a corner table, two steaming mugs between them, the shop bathed in the last light of the day. "I never thought," she said, "that opening this place would make me feel bigger." Ethan smiled. "You were always bigger, Madison. You just stopped hiding it." She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sun sink past the rooftops. No grand gestures, no strings, just them. Two people who had learned how to love without asking the other to become something they weren't. And in that quiet, they knew the chapters ahead would be theirs to write, side by side. Madison's journey had never been about finding a billionaire or building a business from someone else's generosity. It was about reclaiming the parts of herself she'd set aside for too long. Her courage, her creativity, and the belief that she was worthy of being loved exactly as she was. When she first walked into that wedding reception, she was a woman bracing herself for humiliation, certain she had nothing to offer but a polite smile and a quick exit. But that impulsive hug had cracked open a door she didn't even know was there, leading her into a connection built not on wealth or appearances, but on shared truths and the courage to be seen. Ethan had his own quiet transformation. For a man who had been followed all his life, photographed, interviewed, analyzed, Madison offered something priceless, a space where he could simply be, not a CEO, not a public figure, but a man who could read poetry on a Sunday afternoon and feel at home in someone else's world. Together, they learned that love wasn't about rescue missions or fairy tales. It was about showing up day after day, even when insecurities whispered that the other shoe would drop. It was about creating a shared space, both literal and emotional, where neither had to shrink to fit. In the end, the first page was more than a bookstore cafe. It was a testament to starting over, to taking risks, and to believing that your own story is worth writing. Madison and Ethan didn't need headlines or applause to validate what they had found. The real proof was in the quiet mornings, the laughter over coffee, and the knowledge that they were each choosing the other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And sometimes that's all a love story needs to last.